Our mind is projecting a reality, and we validate that reality through perception. And when there is a mismatch in the validation, we experience the absence.
Or you have to say that the fundamental nature of these little building blocks of reality are themselves conscious in some sense. I am skeptical about whether AI could actually be conscious.
Hello everyone, thank you for coming back on another episode of Jay Thakkar Show. Today we have Dr. Laura Gao. She is an expert in philosophy of mind, and she works in the Department of Philosophy at the University of Liverpool. Thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thanks, it's a pleasure to be here, Jay. Thanks.
Thank you. So, to start with, can you explain what is philosophy of mind? Because in general, when we hear this term, it's usually like, okay, we talk about what is going inside our head, what is going inside our brain, and that kind of then goes and relates to psychology as a field as well.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say, first of all, our minds are really important to us, aren't they? You know, we've got what we believe, what we think about, our emotions, our desires, our experiences. All of this stuff is stuff going on in our minds, like our personalities and who we feel like we really are.
Right.
So it's really important to us. Like, our minds are so important, and yet there's a big kind of mystery about what our mind actually is. So is our mind something like a soul, or something sort of non-physical that's separate from our sort of physical bodies? Or is our mind just literally the same thing as our brain? Or is our mind somehow incorporating like our whole bodies and the environment that we're in? So there's this big question about like what our mind is. And that's, I suppose, one of the main things that philosophers of mind are interested in. Lots of other things too, but that's kind of one of the main ones, I guess. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, and so how do you differentiate, how do you differentiate between brain and mind then? Because in general notion, we consider both as the same thing, which is inside our skull.
Do you, Jay? Okay, that's very interesting. That's interesting. You're a natural physicalist then, I would say. Nowadays, it's true that physicalism, which is the view that, yes, our minds are... Usually physicalists think that our minds just are our brains. That is probably the dominant view. But there are still dualists around. So dualists are people who think that no, our minds are something different from our brains. Of course, there's a connection with our brains. No one denies that. No one denies that like what's going on in our brain has a really important like causal role to play. But there are dualists who think that even though there is this connection with our brain, you can't identify the mind with the brain. The mind is something over and above the brain. Yeah.
So is it something kind of a soul or something?
Well, perhaps different people have different theories about what the mind could be. In some religions, yes, there's the idea that your mind, or like yourself, sort of who you are, this is your soul, and not, essentially tied to your physical body, which of course opens the possibility that your mind could continue to exist in some sense beyond the death of your physical body.
Interesting. So what do you believe?
Good question. So I am actually a physicalist. So okay. I do believe that your mind just is your brain. But I think, so one of the things I try and do in my work is like look at the implications of that view. So look at what you have to say some quite strange things if you want to really be a consistent physicalist. And I think sometimes those strange things you have to say aren't fully sort of acknowledged even by physicalists. So one of the things I try to do is say, here are the really strange things you have to say if you want to be a physicalist, and here's how we can say them and how it's okay. Yeah. Interesting.
So moving on, in one of your articles it says that everything is clear or perceptual experiences are transparent. So what do you mean by that? And like, can you explain the transparency of perception?
Yeah, of course. So I should say, although I work in philosophy of mind quite broadly, but my focus really is on perception. And transparency is this idea that you get in philosophy of perception. And philosophers say our perceptual experiences are transparent in the sense that we don't seem to be aware of anything going on in our minds when you're attending to your perceptual experience, say your visual experience. You're taken straight to the objects and properties out there. So when I'm looking at you, Jay, my perceptual experience is just of you. Okay. And you are external to my mind, you're out there in the real physical world, and my perceptual experience just gives me like the physical world around me. It doesn't give me anything internal. So that's the key idea of transparency. Now, in philosophy of perception, there are two main groups, really. There are the internalists who think that, sort of like me, everything mental is going on is inside. It's internal. It's your brain or your mind inside your head, and then there's the physical world out there. And there are externalists who think that the perceptual experiences that we have depend essentially, and not just causally, on the stuff going on out there. And the transparency debate is between these two groups of people. So the externalists they say, look, perceptual experience is transparent. Think about your experiences. Aren't you just taken straight to the world? Isn't this connection with the world apparent in your perceptual experience? And they say that gives us, gives weight to our view that actually the external world is essential to your experience. So that's why there is this debate about transparency.
What's your view?
So I've actually written 2 papers on this, so I probably won't go into the full details of the lot, but so I've written the paper you mentioned, which is that everything is clear and all perceptual experiences are transparent. I wrote a previous paper called The Limitations of Perceptual Transparency, where I try to say that basically this debate is a big muddle. So I've said the people who want to say that perceptual experience is transparent, they want it to be the case that there is an essential link to the world in our perceptual experiences. And I say you can't get that from thinking about your experience and from introspecting. Right. All you can get, if you introspect your experiences, all you can get is that it seems to us that everything we're aware of is out there in perception and not in here. And I say you can't use that to argue that as a matter of fact, everything we're aware of is out there and not in here. So is that clear, that distinction, would you say?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, why does this argument then matter a lot?
It's always fun if you can spot a muddle in the literature. If you can spot where some confusion, because what happened in the literature that I was trying to sort of clear up, if you like, was that people were conflating those two senses of transparency. So I'm saying, on one understanding, we can say it seems to us that everything we're aware of is out there and not in here. And the other claim is everything actually is out there and not in here when we're having perceptual experiences. Mm-hmm. They're two very different claims. One is a claim about how it seems to us, and one is a claim about what's actually the case. And in the literature, those claims were getting muddled. People were sort of conflating those two senses, and I wanted to unpack them and say, all introspection can give you is how things seem in perception. But what you externalists want, you want the claim about how things are, and you can't get that from how they seem. So I wanted to keep the two notions apart and then explain you can't get to the idea that everything in perception is actually out there and not in our own minds. You can't get to that just from showing that it seems to be the case, that everything is out there. After all, lots of things have seemed a certain way to human beings, and we've been wrong, haven't we? It seems that the sun orbits the Earth, but we were wrong about that. So you can't get how things are from how things seem. So that was basically that's why the debate mattered. So I wanted to say, you can't use this notion of transparency to decide questions about how perception actually is. So that was what I was trying to do.
Interesting. And going on the similar lane is because when we were young and I got exposed to this concept where it's like whatever color we see is not the actual color, but the color which is reflected from that object. So we do not know what exactly the object is. We only know from the color it reflects that, okay, this is the color. And then growing up, we got to know that that, there are lots of things we cannot see. We can only just see this spectrum of radiation, which we call light. And it seemed interesting to me. Then it's like there's a lot of thing which we do not know but exists. And what are the ways then can we know and understand and perceive? And even if we know them, are they right or wrong? Do they really exist or not?
Yeah, Jay, I completely agree with you, actually. And so I'm a big believer in thinking that our experiences and how we experience the world is one thing, and what the world is actually like is something else entirely. And I think some philosophers kind of want to keep those two things together. They want to say, but no, surely things must be sort of as they seem, or, they don't want to think that we're getting things so wrong. And they're uncomfortable with the idea that our perceptual experiences, for example, could be wildly misleading. Whereas I'm quite comfortable with that. I don't mind at all. I think it's quite nice to think that who knows what the world out there is actually like. And you're quite right to bring in colour, because colour is something where it's a situation where most vision scientists that I'm aware of think that colours that we experience, they're not actually out there in the world at all. Of course, there are objects out there, they reflect light in different ways back to us, but the experiences that we have as a result of that are things sort of that are quite idiosyncratic to us, and other animals with different visual systems experience other colours or different, colours to us when encountering those same objects. I think it's a famous fact that bulls actually can't see red. So there's this idea of, a red flag to a bull. But bulls, most other mammals, have only 2 colour cones, and they actually can't see red. So, yes, anyway. So I agree with you. What the world is like is one thing. What our experiences are like is something else.
Interesting. Then how do we see going further on this debate? Because we see a lot of work going on in neuroscience and psychology to understand perception through a more rigid and scientific methods. Do we see philosophers in future, including would use those results and build more ideas and more better theories on that?
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I think most philosophers want to work in partnership with science, and hopefully scientists want to work in partnership with philosophers too. I think they're different approaches to answering sort of life's questions, but they can definitely help each other and work in partnership. And the philosophers who write about colour, they're experts on the vision science as well, actually, which just goes to show that whatever the scientific findings are, there are a lot of different philosophical views that are compatible, or at least that seem to be compatible with those facts, which just shows that we do need the science. We need to understand like the physics and what's actually going on in perception. However, even once we do understand that, there are different philosophical perspectives that are very different from each other, but that do fit with those views. So it's not the case that you can sort of have your philosophical views and then wheel in science to explain which one's right. I mean, philosophers can argue that their view is a better fit with the science, perhaps, but the science doesn't close down the debate. Unfortunately, well, maybe fortunately for philosophers, there's still work to be done once we know the science,
Interesting. It's because, science in itself claims that there is a possibility of it going wrong in the future, so who knows, and maybe philosophers in future say that, science is wrong, I was right.
You never know. It's all open. But I just think everyone interested in these debates, they're interested in the debate. They want to work out what's going on. There are different methods, there are different theories, and hopefully we can all learn from each other and, approach it together, to find out what the best view is,
Cool. Then is the claim of transparency then something we experience in everyday life, like other than the color example? Or is it mostly on theoretical side?
So in the transparency debate, the idea is that this is something that we can all discover. So, your viewers, your listeners can think about your own perceptual experiences, like think about what it's like to sort of hear my voice now, to see us sitting here, to think about, your colour experiences, your shape experiences. And we're supposed to, all of us, be able to think about our experiences and see that all of our perceptual experiences seem to be of stuff that is out there and not stuff that is internal to us somehow. Everything seems to be out there. But like I've said, I've argued that even if that claim is true, and I argue that in perception it is true, even so, it doesn't show anything about the metaphysics of perceptual experience. So it doesn't decide whether everything really is going on in our minds and we could be in the matrix or something, or whether we really are essentially connected to the environment. But this transparency is something we're supposed to, all of us, be able to discover on introspection, just by sort of thinking about our own experiences. Yeah.
Interesting. And you also taught us module of consciousness last semester, and just wanted to touch that side as well. So, how do philosophy of mind talks about consciousness in general?
That's a huge question, Jay. You're going to need many more podcasts on consciousness than what I can contribute here. Definitely get going on that. There are different views. There's the physicalist view, which says that consciousness is. It seems strange to say that consciousness is a neural process, or that our conscious experiences are neural processes. It does seem very strange, and it seems very counterintuitive. But there are good reasons for thinking that must be the case. For example, something we've touched on is that if you want your mental states, your beliefs, your desires, your wishes to have an impact, a control over the physical world, i.e. the movement of your body. If you want to decide to go and get lunch, your body has to move to the cafe, say, and your beliefs and your desires and your wishes, they have to sort of be the cause of your body moving. But the argument is, well, if your mental states are going to cause things in the physical world, they have to be physical themselves. So Descartes famously had this dualist view, which is that your mind is non-physical, and then the big question for Descartes that's never really been answered is, but if your mind is not physical, how does it causally interact with the physical world? How does that happen? How can something that's not physical, that's not extended in space, that's not really located, really, interact with the physical world? It's a huge problem for the dualist, and the physicalist wants to avoid that problem. And that's one of the reasons they say, we want our mental life to be important. We want it to do things in the world. The only way to get it to do things is for it to be physical itself. I don't know if that convinces your readers, but
because I can see both the arguments. I'm from India, and in India we have these arguments, and going on physicalist argument is like we can see some of it making more sense when we see AI developing more. We see that it has a potential to develop some sense of consciousness which we think humans have, or any life on Earth has. And we see that if artificially anything can be created through complex physical structures, then there can be a possibility of consciousness or mind just being a part of our brain and just being a more complex neural process in our brain.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. That's really interesting. That is a really interesting point, because actually, on the particular physicalist view I hold, which is called identity theory, if anyone's interested, I am sceptical about whether AI could actually be conscious. I think of consciousness as something that's essentially neural. And so just as, if you want a glass of water, you have to have a glass of H2O. You can't have a glass of water without H2O, because water just is H2O. And so I think if you want consciousness, you have to have a neural process, because consciousness just is a neural process. So AI, unless it's built out of neurons, like our brains are built out of, I don't think AI could be conscious. However, what you say is a really interesting point, because you're saying even putting that question aside, it's true that AI, like ChatGPT and stuff, it can do a lot of the things that we have thought of as being mental. So we think, we try and remember stuff, we try and remember facts, we try and come up with answers, we try and explain things, and all of that kind of stuff is the kind of stuff that ChatGPT seems to be able to do. You can have a conversation with ChatGPT. And so it looks like the development, I think you're right, the development of technology does suggest that it sort of makes it easier for us to think of our minds as being physical things, because we're seeing all around us objects doing things that previously we thought only minds could do. So yeah, thanks for that point. That's really helpful.
Sure, thank you. And going on the dualist view, I think because I'm working on a sect of Indian philosophy called Samkhya Philosophy, which is a dualist philosophy, which tells that there is any direct interaction between consciousness and matter. It is they define it in a very beautiful way. It's like a girl wanting a man to be, what should I say, to be blank in her beauty.
Okay.
That's why she tries everything to grab and hold the attention of the man. And it is said that man is just consciousness, and the nature or the matter or the material is the women. And women can. It is said that only with the presence of consciousness that matter evolves into more complex things. And it says that because it evolves, it does not want consciousness to go away, because then the evolution will stop.
I see.
And that's why women or the women tries her best to look beautiful, to do her makeup, and to be always around the man, so that the man can praise her beauty all the time. Okay. And similarly, the nature would develop and engage the consciousness, trap the consciousness in the cave, so that it does not realize that you are just consciousness, you are not the matter.
Okay, that's such an interesting view, Jay. We're going to have to talk more about this. We really are. That's fascinating.
Sure.
I mean, there's two things that come to mind. So one is, Aristotle's view, and I'm not an expert in Aristotle, but Aristotle's view it sounds to me quite similar, and you can tell me. But for Aristotle, the mind, it wasn't something distinct from the body, but nor was it identical to the body in the same way that the identity theorist thinks it is. It's kind of like, I mean, he said that our minds or our psychology or our soul, it's the form of the matter. So it's not the shape, that's too, but as an analogy, you could think of it as the shape. So say you've got, a lump of clay, that's the matter, you mould it into a statue, and the statue is the form of the lump of clay. Now, that's an analogy, and obviously there's a lot more to it when we're talking about our minds being the form of our bodies. It wasn't to do with shape, but that was Aristotle. So it seems kind of similar to that consciousness is something that operates over matter. Yeah. So it's not distinct from it exactly, and it's not the same as it's how it operates. And so there seems to be something like that to that idea, but I might have misunderstood.
They said that the consciousness and matter, they are two separate
They are literally separate, but they still have this relationship.
Separate.
Okay.
But without consciousness, matter cannot evolve.
Okay.
So, and the evolution of matter gives the intellect, and that intellect allows us to realize that we are pure consciousness and not the matter.
Okay.
So it is the eventual state, but it is described in this way, and that seems more interesting to me, because there's always a question of how do they interact.
Yeah, and everyone has that question.
A lot of time we see that it's mostly a direct causation, that there's some or the other direct point of contact where there's causation happening. And here in this philosophy, it's interesting that, and and I can see some of its effect in science as well, because there's this experiment called Young's double slit experiment. It's we observe light, and when we observe, light behaves as particle. When we don't, it behaves as wave of energy, and it's just when we are conscious about it, the form changes. It changes from the most fundamental wave form to a more complex particle form, and it is fundamentally just the same thing.
Yeah, I know, that's a really weird experiment, isn't it? I'm definitely not qualified to give an opinion on that, certainly not in public. No, that is really interesting. Another view that I'm reminded of is panpsychism. Have you come across panpsychism?
No,
it's in a way, it's an old view. It's the view that reality is somehow fundamentally conscious in some sense, not in the kind of high level way that we are. So there's no sort of, I don't know, existential angst or like worries about things. You know, it's a very kind of minimal sense of consciousness, like a conscious glow almost. Right. And panpsychists, they say that sort of the best way for explaining how consciousness is present in the universe is to think it's always been there. And we're actually, it's not idealism, you know, the idea that everything just is consciousness or mentality, exactly. It's the idea that the fundamental nature of the physical world is actually consciousness. So we think of us like our bodies, you know, they're built up of cells, that are built up of atoms, that are built up of, you know, everything that atoms are built up of. The panpsychist says, either we have to say that somehow when you put all this stuff together, somehow you get consciousness, or you have to say that the fundamental nature of these little building blocks of reality are themselves conscious in some sense. So they would agree with you that in a way, I don't know, like the evolution of matter involves consciousness at the fundamental level. It's not something that happens quite late on in the sort of history of the universe, which is what the physicalists will say. The physicalists will say for billions of years there was nothing conscious, and then consciousness evolved much later in the day. But the panpsychist thinks it's always been there, which might be connecting with what you're saying.
I mean, there's also a non-dual view in Indian philosophy, and that says that everything is nothing but pure consciousness. So everything builds out of that pure consciousness and separates into matter and individual beings. And our our aim is to then realize that everything is just one. So it's just one point, and we all are evolving from there. But everything here is just an illusion. You're nothing but just a pure state of consciousness. Yeah.
I mean, there are definitely overlaps as well. I don't think that's really interesting. Yeah, we definitely need to talk more about that kind of thing.
Sure. So, I just want to know, what's your most interesting topic currently in philosophy of mind?
Okay, well, actually, it's interesting that you say that, because recently I've been sort of moving away from perception a bit. I mean, I'm still very interested in philosophy of perception, and I will continue to work on it. But so the paper that we've been talking a little bit about, the Everything is Clear paper, in that I try to say that in perception, everything seems to be out there.
Right.
But cases that allegedly seem to be in here. So if you imagine blurry experience, or imagine, you know, if you press very lightly on your eye, you can, with your closed eyelid, you can sort of have flashes of light. Or after images, if you stare at a bright light for a long time and then look at, you know, a wall, you can see these sort of colour experiences. So people have claimed that they seem to be in our minds somehow. They don't seem to be out there. And in the paper we're talking about, I argue that actually perceptually they do seem to be out there. And so insofar as our perceptual phenomenology is concerned, our perceptual experience, after images seem to be out there, even the blur, even blurriness seems to be out there. It's just that we have a kind of cognitive experience. We know that the world is not blurry. The world is not really blurry. So if we're experiencing blurriness, there's probably something going on with our vision. But that's because that's what we know. I want to say perceptually, the world actually looks blurry. It seems that somehow the world has gone blurry. It's just cognitively, like our beliefs and what we think about the world means that blur, we don't actually attribute it to the world. So that's what's going on in that paper. But now, as a result of this, I started thinking about what other role this kind of cognitive experience might be playing in our lives. So I wanted to use it there to explain something going on in perception. I've also used it to explain absence experience. So if you're working on your laptop in a cafe, you go and get another coffee, you come back and your laptop is gone, you have this experience of absence. You experience the absence of your laptop. And a lot of people say you sort of see the absence of your laptop. And I wanted to say it's not perceptual, it's cognitive. It's like you think the absence of your laptop. It's not a perceptual thing, it's a cognitive experience. And I'm now working on a new project looking at the role that cognitive experiences can play in how we decide things and how we, in our behaviour in the world and how we decide things. And I want to argue that we have lots of beliefs and we think that our beliefs help us to decide what to do. Like you might believe that you're hungry, you believe that there's a cafe down the road and you decide to go and get a sandwich. And I want to say only our beliefs that we experience as seeming true to us, only those beliefs actually play a role in our decisions, in our everyday decisions. And so if our beliefs, for some reason, don't have that kind of cognitive experience of seeming true, they won't play a role. Shall I give you one example of a belief that doesn't seem true, because it might help? So we all believe that objects are mostly empty space. So if you look at a bit of the physics, we understand that given how atoms are composed and how they connect together to form the table, objects are mostly empty space.
Yeah.
But we have that belief, but it doesn't seem true to us. It doesn't seem to us that objects are mostly empty space. So we have a belief that doesn't seem true. And I want to say that in our theoretical reasoning, it's all fine. We can still, answer the exam question about objects correctly. But in our everyday lives, if our beliefs don't seem true, they won't have an impact on us. And I try and explain some, cases of irrational actions that I think might be being caused by the fact that our beliefs aren't seeming true to us. So that's what I'm working on now. So I've moved away a bit from philosophy of perception onto this new idea, but I'm really excited about it. So yeah.
Interesting. So I think, you can tell me if this is wrong or not. So what I think, this is just an idea I got. It's like maybe that our mind is projecting a reality, and we validate that reality through perception. And when there is a mismatch in the validation, we experience the absence. So it's like the laptop example you gave. So when I was coming back with my coffee, my brain wanted my laptop to be on the table, but my eyes did not perceive the laptop on the table, and that mismatch created the experience of absence.
Yeah, I agree with you. Really, in most cases, or a lot of cases, we have an absence experience because of a mismatch or like a failure of expectation. We've expected there to be something. And it's not there, and that's what causes it. So I agree with you, really. I agree. I think my claim is that it's trying to account for like the nature of that absence experience. So I agree with you as to the cause of it. But when we say, what is that experience? What kind of experience is that? Okay. A lot of people have wanted to say it's perceptual. And you can understand it. You're looking at a table with your laptop and you've come back and now you're looking at a table and there's no laptop. And you might think that this is then a perceptual experience, that you see the absence of your laptop. But I've said, for various reasons, which we don't need to go into really, but it's ultimately a perceptual view isn't going to work, and it has to be a sort of cognitive experience. But I'd agree with you as to the cause. For the most part, it's due to a failure of expectation, probably, yeah.
It is really interesting. So, do you have any questions for me?
Well, but definitely want to talk more about what you were talking about before. Yeah, about the consciousness and its relationship to matter. So definitely, but I'd need to think longer about what specific question I want to talk to you about, because that sounds really interesting, and I haven't come across it before. Sure. So I'd love to talk more about that.
The causation is like that consciousness is a ball of light, matter is something which needs to be illuminated, and when this ball of light comes near to the matter, when light falls on matter, so the presence of consciousness is itself enough for matter to evolve. So there is no direct contact.
Yeah.
It's just that consciousness illuminates matter and matter evolves.
It enables matter somehow without...
Yeah, so the existence of consciousness is itself a catalyst for matter to evolve.
Okay. So it would have to be there at the beginning of the universe. Yeah. That's the idea.
It is said that they both were there fundamentally.
Yeah, I see. Yeah. And, I don't know if you've ever looked into sort of Spinoza. I wonder if there's an overlap. I don't know that much about Spinoza, but maybe we can find some connections between these two ideas.
Sure, definitely. Yeah. So, I mean, thank you so much for giving us your time.
No, thank you, Jay. It's been lovely talking with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.